Scientific dictatorship is going to look like this. You will have no control of your world in the future, and personal control. Decisions will be made for you that you did not want to make. Now, you may be happy with it today, but like the drug addict is happy with the first few fixes of a drug that he gets, eventually it overwhelms him and he becomes a slave to it.
We have a very special guest, Patrick Wood. I just found out he's from Phoenix, Arizona in the US. And he's the chief editor-in-chief of Technocracy.news. And he has authored several books, including Technocracy, the Hard Road to World Order, and the Technocracy Rising, basically the Trojan horse of global transformation. He also publishes articles on topics such as transhumanism, scientism, and how these are transforming global economics and politics, and religion, et cetera, et cetera. And with no other explanation, we're going to have Tamar step into the room and start the interview with our great guest.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I just want to make sure I'm being heard well. Rod? Yes, everything's coming in good?
Perfect.
All right, wonderful. So really welcome to the show, Patrick. It's an honor and a pleasure and a joy to have you on. I have so many questions for you.
That's great.
As Rod was saying, you have published a few books on technocracy, and the last one is The Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so in this book, it says that you connect the dots of modern globalization in a way that has never been seen before, so that the reader can clearly understand the globalization plan, its perpetrators, and its intended end game. So maybe you can tell us more about that.
Yeah, wow. Well, I wrote both of these books before COVID, and I had no predictive ability. I'm not a prophet, that I could just look into the future. But the handwriting was kind of on the wall, so to speak, starting years ago. And, this was kind of the focus of my book, was to show the globalization movement in progress and what they were saying, what they were intending to do. And, the areas that they had been working in for some time. And we'll talk about, I'm sure, as we go along, this technocracy ideology goes way back to the early 1900s. And so it's nothing new, but it's very different. And it's hard for people to get their mind wrapped around it, because it can't be compared to anything we know that we've dealt with in the past, like Marxism or communism or socialism or fascism. There are overlaps, it seems like at times, but technocracy is a unique thing. And as I studied it, I've studied globalization for 45 years, written about it as well. This is the culmination of at least 50 years of planning, infrastructure building, et cetera, by these people to literally create what they called originally a new international economic order. So there's a decided economic feature to this, but it's much deeper than that, probably much worse than that. So anyway, that was kind of the framework that I developed my books in the first place. And I do believe in January certainly by January of 2020, that became the coup d'etat of this group of people that are operating on a global basis. This was at least the beginning of their coup d'etat to try and assert control over the whole planet. And, this sounds kind of crazy and kind of far out, but now here we are in 2022, and we see the global economic system is almost in shambles. We see the supply chain is breaking up. We see at least medical dictatorship in many countries, and on the story goes. A lot of people who have read my books, from a few years ago now, are calling me back and they're saying, we need to talk. This is exactly what you said would happen. I say, well, I'm sorry, but yeah, it wasn't that I had no crystal ball, but this was what they were saying they wanted to do. And here we are.
All right. So just to give basically a summary, maybe for some of our listeners who aren't really grasping what you're talking about yet,
Yes.
You're talking about the movement of elites in the world who are looking past nation states and looking at more of a one world government, a global government. And there is an attack on nation states. And we citizens who love our countries are going to be the victims of this, and they are moving us towards this way through any means that they have. And one of them is technology, and that is through, I guess, communication, surveillance, control, etc. Am I right so far?
You're right so far.
Okay. If I want to pull this in a biblical direction, I would call it the modern day Tower of Babel people. And I've said this so many times on my show, where you have these people who want to make this tower or this one world government today into heaven, dethrone God, and we would become the masters of our own destiny. We don't need God telling us what to do. We're going to decide what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. We'll redefine things through language, through all sorts of things. You're not a stripper, you're an exotic dancer. You're not a pervert. It's just sexual experimentation. I mean, they just redefine things to make it sound very nice and acceptable and mainstream. And so this is kind of like what we're looking at today. That's what I see, but please feel free to weigh in.
Well, I would agree with you. And I've studied the Tower of Babel episode quite a bit in the last, really over a number of years. And the one thing that really struck me when I first started really looking heavily at transhumanism as well as technocracy, and I believe they're like Siamese twins joined at the hip at this point, we're kind of going forward to the complete reset of humanity and the world at the same time. But what really struck me is the digital language that we have, that we know is ones and zeros, bits and bytes and so on. Computer programming and digital technology, it has a very common language across it. And you can take people from 10 different countries who don't speak the same language and sit them down in a conference room with a computer screen, and show them computer code. And they'll start talking like this. They can communicate perfectly. They know exactly what they're talking about. And it really struck me that the world all of a sudden has kind of a de facto common language, like they did back in those days in of the Tower of Babel, where everybody could communicate with each other. And they have used this common language to kind of build this whole framework that we're looking at today in the world, the technology framework. And so we see the Internet of Things, for instance. We see, all the communications, the propaganda, and we see, computer, quantum computer development, stuff like that. All of these things are really interesting, but you're right in the sense that the technocracy movement in particular, and I won't talk about humanism or communism, whatever, but the technocracy movement in particular, originally said, and they continue to say today, that they are essentially taking over the evolutionary process to create man in their own image and the world in their own image. And I personally, I believe in the creation story, not in evolution, but those who believe in evolution now believe that, we got this far, and we're lucky we got this far, but we really need to take over the process now, and we need to evolve society and evolve humanity, with this new advanced technology that we have. And so we can create genetic engineering situations where we can modify people and animals and seeds and insects and fish and everything else on the planet to do a better job than God did in the first place. And it's pretty egotistical. People talk in back rooms and stuff. You and I could have a talk somewhere. We might speculate about wild things, and people, if anybody is listening, say, boy, they're really crazy. The problem with all of this talk that started back in the 30s, 1930s, is that now they have the means to do it. Once you can talk about something, but once you have the means to do it and somebody perceives you have the intent to do it, and then you start to do it, there's big trouble, so to speak, in River City. And that's where we are today. They're actually doing what they said they were going to do, and they have the means to do it. Even if it's not government money, it's certainly private money at this point that has it as well.
Can you tell our audience, define the word transhumanism, and tell us why you think that the elites in the world today would want to take mankind and make us more technologically, physically advanced?
Well, the concept of transhumanism is to apply technology to the human condition for the sake of not just improvement of, like exoskeletons so that you can lift heavy weights or something, but so that you can extend your life and ultimately become immortal. And omniscient as well, that you could know everything, get plugged into the master global computer so that you can have access to all knowledge. This sounds pretty crackpot, but that's exactly what these people believe. And, there's people like the head of engineering at Google, Ray Kurzweil. That's exactly what he says. He's written a book about it, as a matter of fact. And so it's not ambiguous. But the thing that kind of glues them together is what I consider to be a twisted philosophical proposition and a twisted religious proposition at the same time, and that is scientism. And scientism was a philosophy that was originally started in the early 1800s by a French philosopher. And he stated that science essentially was going to be the new God, and that the God of history is going to be obsolete. And he actually called for a priesthood of engineers and scientists to administer or minister to this new God of science. Scientism rejects all other forms of truth outside of what can be proven by their science, and often now today is pseudoscience, but that's another story. But they believe that if it can't be demonstrated by science that something is true, it's simply not true, period, in a subject, throw out the whole thing. So as a result, they completely reject philosophy as a source of learning about nature and the universe and man's relation to it. They throw out ethical studies as well. They throw out biblical studies altogether. The Bible, they believe, is just basically a myth, and there's no truth in it whatsoever that could be proven. And there's a whole other host of things that are related to that, like, take emotions, human emotions, for instance. So can love be proven in a test tube? No. But is love a real thing? I think most people would say, well, yeah, it is a real thing. And people fall in love, they get married, and, they build family units, and, you have love for your family and love for your friends. But it can't be proven in a laboratory. So we find the mind of a technocrat. I've studied this just on this for this reason. The mind of a technocrat has absolutely no compassion for humanity whatsoever, none. And they look at humanity just like a bunch of or peoples like cattle in a feedlot. they're just resources on the face of the planet, no different than the fish or the deer or the cattle in the field. They're just resources to be managed and nothing special. This is a very low view of humanity. It's led some people to speak and write about the fact that it seems to be very, very anti-human in the end of it, because it does not recognize humanity as being anything special on the face of the planet. So this business of scientism we see throughout technocracy, which is, they call it the science of social engineering, and of course the economic management of the world, and transhumanism as well. They're both related in that they want to transform, they want to morph themselves into version 2.0 of whatever. It's society 2.0, it's humanity 2.0. We see the World Economic Forum talking about this openly now, about resetting the human condition as well as the economic condition. And it's like, ooh, well, they didn't ask us. We wanted to be transformed or reset. But Klaus Schwab does say, well, you'll own nothing and be happy.
I've been saying also that, all we hear today is, you have to listen to the science, listen to the science. And as my mother always said, the science has become God, the scientists have become the priests, and the laboratory has become the temples. And that's what we see, happening today, because you have to get God out of the picture. In communism and Marxism, God had to be dead because the state was the highest thing that you had to listen to, and the collective was more important than the individual. And people should go read books by Ayn Rand in order to appreciate the individual more. All right, so I wanted to ask you, so we have what you're saying is this technocracy. We see it happening today. It's taking over our lives. You can't, there used to be a time here in Israel where if you wanted to get on a bus, you can pay in cash, or you can buy a ticket that had these like little punchy things each time you used it. But today you need to have a electronic pass. It's like a credit card. You wave it over the machine that's in the bus or on the train. And when they started doing this, a lot of people were thinking, oh, this is so cool. It's so futuristic. I don't have to have cash on me, exact change, etc. But on the other hand, what worried me was, now the government knows exactly where I'm going, when I'm going, how long I'm staying there. I don't, why should the government know all these things, what I do and where I go? It made me feel very uncomfortable. And we see this happening today in so many different places of our lives. And now we've got it with the green pass for the coronavirus shots that they have, the mRNA experimental bioweapons that they stick in our arms. I, thank God, have not gotten it. Thank God. Thank you. I've been suffering because I don't have the green pass. And even when I got Corona and I was entitled to the green pass, I never even downloaded it, because I call it the apartheid pass, because it divides people, puts people into classes. I think this is very bad. It's divide and conquer ideology in order to get a population to go with you more. But my point is, we see technology really starting to take over our lives and control us. And I'd like you, if you can, to talk about the ways that they're doing it. I mentioned the green pass cards or the apartheid passes. I mentioned the bus passes, but I'd like to talk, if you can, about surveillance and other things, because I know that in these last 2 years, a lot more cameras have gone up here, even in Israel. I understand 5G infrastructure as well. We won't go there in this show because that's a whole different topic, but things have been done during these past 2 years as there's been lockdowns in the world. And I'd like you to talk about all of this and surveillance again.
Absolutely. I'm going to give you a kind of an analogy. I think it will help you make sense. When technocracy was invented in 1932, it was crystallized in 1932. They were talking about it before that, but it was at Columbia University, New York City, which was the seat of progressivism at the time, and still is, I might add. But the scientists and engineers in the heat of the Great Depression believed that that the world economic system was dead. They thought that capitalism and free market economics was dead, and so they would take it upon themselves to create a brand new economic system based on resource management, not on supply and demand, not on price or currency or anything like that, but a brand new system where they would make decisions about consumption of goods and manufacturing of goods for North America initially. Now it's global, and the means to do it, they were very open about this, was what they called the science of social engineering. And I want to, just having laid that groundwork, I'm going to pivot to my analogy. Let's say that these scientists and engineers decided to build a factory. Doesn't matter what factory is all about. Maybe they're making tires or cars, it wouldn't matter. But they're going to build a factory, and let's say it's going to be a, I don't know, 20,000 square foot factory with employees and lots of other automated processes, assembly lines, et cetera. Well, if you wanted to be a good manager of that factory, you'd want to put sensors into the machinery so that you could have some kind of a warning signal that something's about to go wrong, so that you go fix it. Like if the oil gets low in a hydraulic valve or something, you send out a technician, red light goes off over there, go fill it up, put some more oil in it, and the factory runs on. Well, this engineering mindset all of a sudden got the idea, gee, humanity is just like the factory. We're going to treat the whole world as if it were a factory. Therefore, we need to start this monitoring process in order to determine what's going on out there, so we can get an early feed on how to, manipulate the course of affairs in society. This is a wrong proposition from the get-go, because humanity is not a factory and people are not robots. But honestly, you can see this attitude now everywhere you look. All of the surveillance, all of the sensors, and it's not just cameras, by the way, I know you know that. Every conceivable thing about you today is discoverable and collectible by these technocrats, with the idea to monitor and then control society as a result of it. This is happening in every country on the face of the planet right now. And I know it's happening in your country, and it's certainly happening in mine. We see it in every continent. We see it in Asia. We see it in Africa, South America. It's just everywhere. The mentality, the mindset of a technocrat is, you can never have enough data. There is no such thing. That would be an oxymoron. You cannot ever have enough data, even if it's down to the molecular level. And we see even this happening now with the collection of DNA around the world, for instance, of all living species on the face of the planet. Well, why do they need to know all of the genetic structure of all the species on it? Because they need to know. There's no answer to it. They need to know these things. So they collect data. They collect information on every moving thing and every physical thing on the face of the surface of the earth.
And what do they do with that information? I mean, we understand that Facebook collects a lot because they want to market to you. They want to send products that would interest you. But what about, I mean, what would be the other reasons? Because the governments might want to quell uprisings if they hear talk and murmuring about dissatisfaction with things, or what would be some of the reasons?
Well, the main overarching reason in my mind is to create a structure that will, at least it will end up to be a scientific dictatorship. When they put a fence around you, if you will, a digital fence around you, you are highly controllable, highly manipulatable. You can be, the decisions that you make can be changed, even if you don't know that you're changing your mind. The social engineering that is being used with this knowledge that's fed back into, artificial intelligence algorithms and so on to sort out what's really going on, whether it's Facebook or Google or some other, giant system that collects data, and governments are doing this too. The data is collected, manipulated, and then turned around to manipulate the people that it was collected from. That's just that simple.
Give an example. Give an example.
Well, okay, let's take in the case of Google, because Google's global, right? I don't know how sensitive people in Israel are to Google and what they do, but Google has the ability now to collect data on all of its people that come to it, to search on a search engine. The search engine is free for us to use, but it isn't free in terms of the data that it collects from us. So by the time you come to Google for a search, Google anticipates already who you are and knowing all the information about all the things you search for over time and all the things that you've purchased and your political predisposition, et cetera. When you start to type in a search phrase in Google, you now have a drop-down list that will be particular to you. In other words, they tailor that list based on their artificial intelligence analysis to give you a choice of things to pick from. And people usually will pick from, oh, that's what I'm searching for. And they click down and they click on it. But the guy next to you or the neighbor may be searching for the same phrase. He'll get a different drop down than you got because it's been personalized for him. And the whole purpose of this is, and this has been documented by psychologists and data scientists as well, the purpose of Google doing this is to influence your thinking and behavior without you even knowing it and realizing that it's happening. Because how can you know that your neighbor's getting a different list? You're not watching your neighbor's screen and you don't talk to him. But they're using this kind of AI technology now to take the data that's collected, they put it through the system, and they turn it back on you to manipulate you. The goal, and again, this brings up kind of a sub goal of technocracy, and that is to develop a system of certainty. They want to, they want a known certain outcome to take place, a predictable outcome to take place. And so as Google manipulates you, they're doing it in such a way as to make you more predictable to them, right? They want you to do what they tell you to do. And people don't even know this is happening by and large, but it does millions of times a day. Well, if you multiply this kind of a scenario out to all the other things you're looking at, whether it be government, whether it be private industry, whether it be private security firms or data firms, whether it be IBM, operating all over the world, the story is always the same. Collect more data, analyze it, turn it around to manipulate the people on the other end. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of difficult to explain.
No, I hear you. I'm just trying to, besides marketing and maybe knowing if you would be a political danger to them because your ideas are different, maybe you're not happy with the system or whatever. I'm just trying to figure out what other reasons they would want to do that. Do you have any strong feelings about having a smartphone in your, using a smartphone, having the Alexa, Amazon app or device, or the Google Hub, Home Hub, I think it's called, all of these things? What's your opinion on those?
Well, these are the engines of, collecting everything, really everything about you. There's been so many faux pas with Alexa, for instance, that it tends to listen to you even when you don't want it to listen to you. You're not asking it anything, it's just listening to you anyway. Well, the data is being collected from you, harvested from you, and this is the value that they receive. The companies that collect this data, like the Googles of the world and Facebooks, they view us as not the product, but the resources. And remember I said earlier that technocracy is resource management. We are the resources. So when they harvest data from you, they're turning that into resources to build other products that they can sell to other companies. That's how they make money. And so what they're selling essentially is predictability about what you will do in the future, whether it be vote a certain way or whether it would be to buy a certain product that they want you to buy. You never see this process taking place. Sometimes you get a glimpse of it. I remember some anecdotal stories where people were sitting in front of a Samsung television talking about some product that they saw on the screen. And the next day, all of a sudden, they open up a browser and some advertisements for that product show up. And they go, what? I was just talking about that last night. How did that happen? Well, zing, you just saw a little glimpse of how they're using the data and how it's getting passed around to these different companies to manipulate you.
So let me play devil's advocate here for a moment and switches around and say, okay, look, you know what? I don't care. So they know, I'd rather get advertisements of things that will interest me rather than things that don't interest me. So what do I care? And if I give up my privacy, I've got nothing to hide. So what do I care? And it's convenient for me.
Yeah.
And so what would you answer?
Oh boy, we hear that all the time. I hear this every day from somebody. Well, look, scientific dictatorship is going to look like this. You will have no control of your world in the future, and personal control. Decisions will be made for you that you did not want to make. Now, you may be happy with it today, but like the drug addict is happy with the first few fixes of a drug that he gets, eventually it overwhelms him and he becomes a slave to it. This is not what humans want in the end, to be boxed into a scientific dictatorship situation where you can't get loose. China is a good example right now. China has, for instance, a social credit scoring system. Everything is known about you. Every possible thing you do is known about you. And I hate to even bring this up, but with the Olympics now in view in China and Beijing has decided to bring back the anal swab to test for COVID. It's like, what? What is this? They collect data on everything in China. So you're walking down the street, and if you commit a violation, whatever it might, jaywalking, whatever it might be, your fine will be taken from your account before you even get home, and your score will go down if you don't pay your debts or you get a divorce or something and you're not a good little citizen. Your social score goes down, and when it goes down, then if it gets too low, they will simply start cutting you out of certain services that you can't do. You can't live in that apartment house over there. You can't go to that university. You can't travel on that high-speed rail. You got to take the slow bus with the chickens. And this type of social squeezing people out that they don't like, this is not pro-humanity whatsoever. This is absolutely anti-human behavior. But the idea of scientific dictatorship is the same everywhere. We see it happening in every country, even with the vaccine passports right now. The haves and the have-nots. You don't have it, you're squeezed out of society. You can't do those things anymore that you used to do. Say, well, I don't like that. I want to have more control over my life. This is the big battle. It's right before us right now, is who's going to control your life and your future. Traditionally, people have had the ability to choose their own future, whatever that might be. And I'm not going to judge one future from another. It's up to you. It's up to individuals to figure that out. It's not up for a group of unelected and unaccountable technocrats to determine your future. And yet that's exactly what they're trying to do. And, when an organization like a Google, for instance, can control potentially the outcome of an election in the country, you have to think about that a minute. Well, why would they want to control the outcome of election? Let's say they did, and you got some leaders that you don't like. and they take the country in a completely different direction than what you wanted. Your future has been denied, period. And somebody else in some lab suit, lab coat somewhere decided what was going to be, and it wasn't you. And if you don't like it, it's just, at that point, it's just tough.
Right. I want to take a moment just to tell our listeners that there's an 8-minute video that they can watch that. I think it was MSNBC made. So it's very mainstream news source, whatever. And 8 minutes, and they talk about the Chinese social credit score system. And you must watch it, because I believe that this is what is waiting down the line for all countries, not just China. And one of the things that you were talking about, there was something else that they had there in order to score you, and that is that they would have in each apartment building, what was called a snitch. And that snitch, your neighbor, she would have to give out, she would have a quota. She would have to, let's say, give 10 reports a week on her neighbors. Oh, this one was opening up their mail downstairs in the lobby, and they were complaining about the government because the mail is so slow in getting here, and they write your name down. And these people also, like, if they don't give these reports, they'll get into trouble. So it's like a vicious circle. And this is what we're looking at, and it reminds you of the Soviet Union, when you had snitches and even children turning their parents in for saying things that might have been against the government. So really, if you at all appreciate your freedom, we have to nip this in the bud immediately. But I understand, and you were talking about the Economic Forum, that we're going towards a cashless society. They want to make digital currency. And one of the ways to do that is to destroy the economies. And that's what we're seeing with the United States now, and with all the lockdowns across the world, where people lost their businesses, maybe lost their homes, couldn't pay their mortgages. And a lot of companies went out of business. And the reason that they are saying that this has to happen for this, as you said, great reset, is because if the economy of a country is working, then the people are not going to want to go to a cashless society. They're going to want to keep their freedom of having cash, buying what they want without the government knowing, or even just limiting how much cash they can pull out, etc. So if you can crash the economies around the world, then you can have your solution, which is going to digital currency, a cashless society, and then they control you even more. So we really have to understand all of these things that we're seeing happening, where this is going, because this is really going to, affect us. So we've talked about surveillance, and we've talked about, as you said, this Chinese social score system that they have. I want to talk to you about an article that was recently published on your website, and it talked about two things, and that was called Wrong Think, which reminded me of 1984, like Newspeak, and virtual gulags. So maybe you can tell our listeners about those two terms.
Well, okay. I guess people would understand what a gulag is at least from Soviet experience, where partly concentration camp, partly work camp, et cetera, but there's no freedom whatsoever, and it's very brutal. That's old think at this point, honestly, for these people, because why go through the mechanisms of having to build isolated cities somewhere to send you to, when they can control you electronically just as well and make you think a certain way just as well. The idea of gulag is forcing you to do what they want you to do versus what you might want to do. And there's nothing more complicated than that. The virtual gulag means that once you are corralled by the algorithm, so to speak, you can't move left, right, up, down, sideways, or anything else. You just have to do what the algorithm tells you to do. A great book to read, by the way, to get back to this is the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Came out in 1932, at the same year that Technocracy was being written up at Columbia University. I do not believe that's a coincidence, by the way. But if you read the book again, if you haven't for a while, read it again. Aldous Huxley was no friend of humanity, in my opinion, by the way. But the book has no political system in it whatsoever. It's strictly, and all babies are, babies are generated, created in, grown in test tubes, and they're genetically engineered to be a certain intelligence level to fulfill certain jobs. There's no political system whatsoever. And this meant that the alphas in society were so smart, they said, that they would just make all the decisions for people, and they wouldn't have any political system. If they didn't like it, it's tough. You just have to do it. Well, the technocrats of the 1930s wrote specifically that they wanted to do away with all political systems. They believed that they were so right, that their science was so right. What is there to discuss? What's nothing to talk about? So you don't need a political system. All you need is them to tell you what to do. Well, you see this natural antipathy today between the technocrat world, i.e., that is the United Nations with sustainable development, with the World Economic Forum, and the political structures of the world. Technocrats are getting stronger, political structures are getting weaker. There's a battle going on here. Although they will use political systems for their benefit short term, call them the useful idiots maybe, there will be a time when if they get total control, they would throw the governmental structures of the world under the bus in a heartbeat. And very few politicians have really realized this. A few have. Interestingly, Putin has. He's figured this out, of all people, that he doesn't like these technocrats coming after his job. He says, you're not going to do that here. But the rest of the world is succumbing to this, not even realizing that they're being beat down, that their power is being taken away from them and handed over to these other people. And governments look at this, and they're looking at the Googles of the world, the big tech companies of the world, and they're saying, okay, you are way out of bounds for what you're doing, and the way you're milking society. We're going to fine you $1 billion here and $1 billion there. You can already see the battle starting to heat up between governments and technocrats in general. But this is a different crowd of people that cannot be compared to communist, Marxist, or socialist, or fascist. It's a different crowd, different mindset. And the digital gulag that's coming, that really is kind of all around us right now, is almost inescapable, because how can you get your hands around a computer algorithm? You can't. It's like, you don't even know who made it.
So give us an example. Give our listeners an example of being in a virtual gulag.
China's the first perfect example again. These, the people in China that are hemmed in to their behavior, if they wander too far outside of that channel that the Chinese technocracy gives them, they either get squeezed out of society where they just can't do things anymore, or they disappear them. We hear this term, well, they disappeared him. Well, what does that mean? Well, nobody ever saw him again. Where'd they go? The families don't know. They're looking for him. Did they send him to a real gulag somewhere, to a re-education center? Or did they just take him out, kill him? And, that leaves a big question mark. But China is a perfect example. It's a walking, living, virtual gulag right now. And this mentality is spreading over the whole world right now. And you say, well, it's just China. Well, China's a big country, but China has exported its technocratic thinking to all of Asia, to most all of South America, to almost all of Africa. We see it all over Europe. We see, and I see it from afar in Israel. It's everywhere on the planet right now. This thinking is crazy. It's like, just let us live our lives and get the heck out of our lives. Just stop it. But of course, they won't stop it. But you can't get your hands on them to push back. With the political system, you can push back. People can assert some measure of power to influence how the government treats the people. And this is true. There's many different political systems in the world. I realize that. Yours is different, structured different than the United States. But with a political structure, we have some mechanism to which we can get feedback from the government. We can talk to people in government, whatever. We can say, we don't like this policy, blah, 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 argue about it, fight about it, and then maybe you'll get some change that'll be constructive for your country. With technocracy, there's no such appeal, none. It's their way or the highway. And they believe, I have to just show the egotistical of it. They produced a book in 1933 when Roosevelt was elected. FDR was elected in our country. They called for Roosevelt to declare himself dictator so that he could simply implement technocracy. And the first thing they wanted to do was dismiss Congress. Send them all home, don't need them. And they created an organizational chart, like a corporate org chart, and said, this is, you need to appoint a continental director and then directors for different functions in society, all the way down to the state level and local level. Technocrats running everything, scientists and engineers, according to the, kind of the scientism mentality that we have an exclusive lock on all truth. This is just absolutely the worst situation that people could have if they were simply just to take over the world at this point, tell you what's right and what's wrong. And that's just the end of it. Yet that's what they're doing with vaccines right now. That's what they're doing with the, with the vaccine passports. They're splitting the entire world down the middle, like apartheid, like you mentioned before. There's no end at this point. There's no end to it. Who do you appeal to? You can go appeal to your government. I can go appeal to my government, and the beat goes on. It just doesn't stop it. So you can see this technocrat control behind the scenes. No government at this point apparently can control it or stop it or even modify it for that matter. They just keep doing the same old stuff over and over again.
You have a chapter in your book called Transforming Religion. Tell us about that.
Well, wow. This was quite a revelation to me at the time when I wrote that, because, I followed like the World Council of Churches and in our country, the National Council of Churches and the interfaith movement throughout the world, where, all the different religions are trying to get together and find some common ground. The whole bulk of them, probably about 10 years ago, turned green. When I say green, I mean United Nations version of green, where everything of the old nature, fossil fuels and, carbon, et cetera, global warming, whatever, the churches of the denominational churches of the world took a left turn into environmental, I call it wackoism, but environmental, green theology. And it was amazing how they did it in bulk, because you found formerly completely incompatible religious systems all of a sudden getting together around the fact that they're all green and they're falling off after this environmental crowd. And we saw this across some Eastern religions, Islam, the main denominations of the world, Catholicism, for instance, the current Pope right now is 120% sold out to sustainable development with the United Nations, completely sold out to it. You see it in the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, and even now in our country and some Baptist churches, and you look at it and you shake your head and say, whatever happened to what you used to be like maybe 20 years ago? They've changed, they've morphed, they've I think the word is they transmorgified into something entirely different now. And they kind of have the same cross on the door and they use the same hymn maybe, but you listen to what the leadership is talking about. It's all green. It's all green now. It's just incredible transformation.
You had on your website, I think, also something about with the new cars that are coming out. They're always talking now about going electric, taking away the gas-powered cars, etc. And you were one of the articles was saying how there's going to be a law now that by a certain year, which is coming soon, that all of these cars have to have kill switches on it, where the government or whoever's in power can just stop your car while you're driving it. Tell us very briefly about that. And then if you have anything you want to share on the screen, I understand maybe you wanted to show us some things, be ready for that. And Rod, in the meantime, also, if anybody in our audience has any questions for our guest, Patrick Wood, they can maybe write them in the chat or let you know, and then you can come on towards the end and do that. So tell us about the kill switch.
Well, again, one more little area of control, potential control over people. And the whole doctrine of sustainable development, which is technocracy, by the way, I write about this very pointedly, that what the United Nations has adopted as sustainable development is nothing more than warmed over technocracy from the 1930s. They want to take automobiles off the road in general. If they could, they would do it. Force everybody into mass transit situations or some other, other than private vehicles. But the idea of putting a kill switch in a car is really nefarious to almost to anybody who would look at it. Why do I need to have a kill switch in my car so that somebody else might turn my car off? The first idea of this is, if you get in and you have alcohol in your breath, if you maybe had a glass of wine or something in the car, with this artificial intelligence built into the sensor, the car will decide whether you're fit to drive. And of course, somebody else makes that algorithm, not you. You don't program your own algorithm as you're fit to drive. But if you step in the car and a sensor in there says, I think maybe you're a little tipsy, or maybe you're a little, not so sharp, or whatever, or maybe you're looking at your phone, we're not going to let you start your car until you get straight.
Don't spill alcohol on yourself.
That's right. Don't spill alcohol on yourself. That's for sure. Don't use hand sanitizer when you're reaching for your keys. but the other side
Keys,
of this is too.
Keys?
Oh yeah, what keys? Right. Insurance companies now and banks are talking about the idea of a kill switch in terms of, like, you don't make your payment. You don't make your car payment. You don't make your insurance payment, like you're supposed to have insurance in your car when you drive it. Sorry, you're not driving your car. Click, you're just sitting on the side of the road, and there's nothing you can do. You can go out and kick your tires, but it won't start the car. There's so many things like this that you just shake your head and you say, why is this necessary? It isn't necessary. The bottom line, it is not necessary, but technocrats think it is necessary, because control over people who they view just as resources like cattle in a feedlot, control over people is their objective. That's their sole objective in life, is to make this system where it can control people like the other resources on the planet, to get it in line with what they view the rest of the planet, whatever it is, the ecosystems, et cetera, get humanity into a channel that they think can be compatible with the rest of the world. And it's absolutely insane, in my opinion.
Did you want to share something on screen for us? Was there anything you wanted to talk about that I neglected
I know
asking you?
We've covered so many good things already. I think I'll refrain from that. We've really hit the major topics. You've got a good handle on what's at issue here. And, looking at the big picture, understanding the philosophy and where the history of it is important. But it's also so important, as you brought up, to understand these particulars today that we're dealing with, because they trace back to the roots, go back to this stuff. The thinking, the mindset of these people is so foreign to our mindset as, I won't say citizens of the world, but as humans, as people. Our mindset is so different than theirs that it's just like space aliens have landed. And I'm not saying that space aliens have landed. I shouldn't have said that. I don't believe in that. But, it's like, where did these people come from? Were they up on a high mountain somewhere, and all of a sudden they came down and they didn't have enough oxygen up there? I don't know. But technocrats build because they can, not because there's a demonstrated need to do so. And they just continue to do this. Case in point, I posted a story this morning on Technocracy.news. China's empty capacity in cities that it's been building, the so-called ghost cities, they now have enough empty cities in China to build 27 New York cities. You've got to think about this. They have built the equivalent of 27 New York cities, and they are empty. There
Why
are
would
no
they do
people
that?
there
Why?
because technocrats build because they can't stop building. They do it, they've engineered a technocracy in China, and a scientifically engineered, if you will, economic system that has the trappings, the outer trappings of what we saw in history with them. But they're so radically different internally in their behavior, the way they're doing things, the way they're thinking, the way they're treating their people. You look at it and you shake your head. I've never seen anything like this in the world. I could not have imagined anything like this in the world. Why would you spend trillions of dollars building empty cities? There's no explanation.
You have another chapter in your book called Taking Action. So I'm sure it's on the minds of a lot of us now. What can we do? What can we do?
I know. I heard a great lecture by a professor in Belgium by the name of Matthias Desmet. He's a professor of clinical psychology.
Yes.
He speaks about mass formation, psychosis, and things like that. And there's a lot of insight into that. I'm like, why is half the world seemingly gone mad right now? And I hear that every day from people. The world's gone crazy. But he gets to the end of his explaining the theory. And of course, he's culturally sensitive in Europe, to genocide and to Bolshevik Revolution, the German experience, etc. As I know, everyone in Israel is culturally sensitive to those things, totally. Well, he says, and this struck me because I have a nonprofit organization that I run called Citizens for Free Speech, which focuses on free speech. And he says, at the end of the game with mass psychosis, which he says always produces a scapegoat as it goes along. This is necessary to have a scapegoat. The Bolsheviks had a scapegoat. Germany has scapegoat, mostly Jews, but also gypsies and blacks and other mentally retarded people, etc. They made a scapegoat out of people, and then they eventually turned around and started killing those people to get rid of them. Well, he says at the end of mass psychosis, if free speech is eliminated from society, from that society, if those people become voiceless, he says that is exactly the point where the killing begins. And that just shocked me. I mean, it really it made me just reassess what I'm thinking. Free speech is the antidote and the natural vaccine against tyranny. It's really the only vaccine, if you will, against tyranny, to stop it, to prevent it from taking over completely. But if free speech, if people are finally silenced, like people like you doing this podcast and telling people other things that the global narrative doesn't want you to tell, if our voices are ultimately silenced, there will be sections of society that become immediately vulnerable, and the killing may well begin. We see this in China a little bit right now, in just current times with the Uyghur population, where they have no voice, they have no free speech whatsoever. You don't hear a word coming from those people, no stories, nothing. They're being shipped off en masse to re-education camps, and they're being, totally, oppressed and suppressed within the Chinese society. Free speech really is important to the world. Keep talking.
All right.
Keep telling the truth over and over and over.
I want to add here, and then Rod, you'll come on, please. You have in your book a dedication at the very beginning. It says, this book is dedicated to the fleeting memories of unalienable rights, freedom, liberty, and the Constitution of the United States. May they yet inspire future generations. I want to say here that what I see, it hasn't. In fact, we see the younger generation today in America with a self-hatred of being American, a self-hatred of their founding fathers, of patriotism, and even freedom. And if you have a generation like this that hates themselves and invites the opposite of free speech, muzzling people, censoring people, banning people. There's a huge support for this, by the way, when they did it to US President Trump. If they can do it to the president of the United States, they could do it to anybody. When you have a generation like this that has been brought up to think like this, I don't see much hope. So one last comment on that, and then we'll go to Rod.
I'll tell you, people naturally want to maintain hope in the future. That's kind of what makes life go around. And I realize different groups of people will see hope from a different angle. My hope, for instance, is not in man, in the future of man. I happen to be a born-again Christian, and my hope is in the Bible and in my Savior. So I have a future hope that gives me an anchor to my life. Now, whatever hope is to different people, the opposite of that, hopelessness, is the kiss of death. Because when people become hopeless, that's when they become totally defeated. There was a story years ago about, this was a psychological story, some scientists in Great Britain, this is back in World War II, caught some wharf rats, and they put them in a barrel of water, and they put a timer on them, and they found out how long it took before they all drowned. They didn't let them out. They just put them in the barrel of water, and they timed it, and they did die. And then they took another group of wharf rats, they threw them in the water, and just before that time was up, when they were just about to die, they grabbed them out and they fluffed them up with a nice warm towel, and after a while they threw them back in the water again. This is pretty cruel, I realize, but just think about it. So then they timed the rats now that had been fluffed up, rescued from the water, and they threw them back in. Those rats lived 40% longer. They swam 40% longer and stayed alive 40% longer, did the first group of rats that had no hope. See, it just makes a point. Hopeless people are doomed to their own failure, as we need hope. However people develop hope, they need to do that. They just need to do that. They need to stop looking at all the negative stuff in the world. There's a ton of negative stuff to look at, but look at the solutions to how you can push back. Look, dedicate. I mean, I haven't worn a mask since this whole thing started, and I won't. I'm not vaccinated. I will not be. I have antibodies, actually. I got COVID and I survived just fine. And I have great antibodies, and my immune system is in good shape. But you need to, people need to steal in their mind this idea, what, if they give me a role to play, I'm not going to play that role, because that just plays into their hands. Don't play it. Just, I know it's going to cost you. It costs me, it costs you, as you said, but don't play that role that they give you to play. You can push back in so many different ways. If it means getting rid of your smartphone and getting a dumb phone, then get a dumb phone. If it means maybe just turning your phone off or walking out of your house without your phone, then try that for a while. See how you like it. You might like it. But there's lots of things people can do today to change, or let's say to redirect the future back to them again, and away from these people, these megalomaniacs that are trying to, tell the whole world what is good for them and what they need to do. This is just anti-human behavior, and we as humans should rise above that and say, we're not going to let you just like wipe out the whole planet. We live here. This is our planet. We live here. This is our society, is our country. And my country is not your country, and you do things differently than me. I love that. That's great. Countries have existed on the face of the planet for a very long time. Sometimes they fight, sometimes they get disagreements, but hey, in the end of it all, how people ultimately are treated.
So we need to keep talking, keep teaching, and rely on our faith in God, because there are more of us than there are of them, and God is on our side, I believe, for all Bible believing people. And it's a wonderful way to end this interview. Patrick Wood from Technocracy.news. And let's open up now the questions from the audience. Rod, take it away. Rod, you're muted, I think.
Yes, I am muted. I'm sorry. I have my microphone off. Dennis posted something up about 15 minutes after the hour. He says, how does this fit into blockchain technology? And would not this movement be against globalists?
It's not. And let me explain why. The United Nations, which promotes sustainable development, that's an economic system for the world, declared several years ago that the whole topic of fintech, which includes blockchain technology, as well as, well, a bunch of other things, but cashless society, digital currencies and property registration, and blockchain can be used for all sorts of things. An economic system needs to have a financial system to support it. Capitalism has a banking system that supports it and that provides money and credit and things like that that's necessary for capitalism to survive. Technocracy and sustainable development are an otherworldly economic system that needs a different financial system than what we have today, traditionally, historically. The United Nations declared that the whole topic of fintech, financial technologies, digital financial technologies, is the system that can support sustainable development. So they themselves have made the connection between the blockchain technology plus the other elements of financial technology today as being the underpinning, the enablement of the economic system that they know as, that we know as sustainable development. And I want to reiterate that the World Economic Forum is so tight with the United Nations doctrines of sustainable development, you cannot hardly tell the difference when you're reading the literature.
It seems that they are connected and inextricably. Who's next? Does anybody have a question you want to address before we go? It's just about time. We've got plenty of comments in the commenting section, but that is about it. Shirley said, Tamar, you're an ace at interviews. So thank you so much.
I love speaking with people, and if I do a good job, thank you, God. That's all I can say. All right, so I guess we'll end it here. I want to thank everybody for coming, and we'll be back at the same time next week. Hopefully there'll be no power outages. Patrick, Israel is expecting snow any hour within the next 12 hours, maybe or so. So power often goes out, and we have here and there, but I'm glad that it all worked out. And thank you again for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. I hope to have you on again sometime. It's been fascinating speaking with you and learning about technocracy and technology and how it's taking over our lives and really kind of like making us slaves. And we have to really put a rein on that to slow it down. And it could be used for good, but it should be voluntary. It shouldn't be forced on us. And
yes. Well, I thoroughly enjoy this, and I commend you for doing your part where you are to blow the whistle on this stuff. This is a global problem. I hate to say it. I hate to use the phrase "we're all in it together," but this is a global problem. And I hear from countries all around the world that are pretty much saying the same thing we're saying right here. So I commend you for speaking up in a difficult situation. Don't give up and just keep doing it.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for being with us. Thank you, Rod, for producing the show. Yes. And thanks to all of our listeners. And thank you, Patrick Wood.
Thank you.